Well, a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you are tuning in from. My name is Adrian Reed, and a very warm welcome to this BA Community webinar. I'm really pleased today to say that we're joined by Corinne Thomas. Now, many of you will probably know Corinne from either perhaps seeing her speak at a conference or seeing her work elsewhere. I've known Corinne, I was trying to work this out, Corinne, I think I've known you for about 12 years, and we
Yeah.
met at an interview room for a large financial services
Oh, we
organisation
did. Oh, yeah.
when you were interviewing me, and you made probably the worst employment decision of your life by employing me. So thank you very much for that back in the day.
So, I don't think so. I did
And
get my revenge, I think, by giving you the most challenging projects I could find.
that's true. But then we did also then subsequently work together in a different guise for a client where where the tables were turned
I think you
somewhat.
turned the tables on me. Yeah, I remember.
um, but I've known Corinne for a long time now. I mean, a little bit about Corinne. Corinne has a really rich history in business analysis and requirements engineering, covering a whole range of sectors from healthcare to telecommunications to financial services. Trainer, consultant in business analysis, but also, I suppose, a parallel discipline. Corinne's currently studying a master's degree in applied positive psychology, is a master NLP practitioner and trainer. So we're going to talk today about culture, mindset, and well-being, and how to navigate the complex world of transformational change, because it's probably true to say that we live in a really busy world. We get burnt out on our projects, but also those that we are working with might get burnt out as well. So Corinne, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's fine. You're welcome, Adrian.
So what I wanted to talk about first, Corinne, and I should say, if you're tuned in live, please do ask questions as we go along. You can type your questions in the Q&A window and we'll answer as many as we can. So where I wanted to start, Corinne, is I don't know about you, but I find there's a bit of an always-on culture at the moment. And it seems to have really ramped up over the past 5 or 10 years, where it's really hard to escape email, WhatsApp, Slack channels, Jira tickets, whatever it happens to be. And I find myself sometimes having trouble switching off. How do you find the always on? Do you think the always on culture can affect well-being? And what sort of tips would you give for avoiding that?
I think it does, yeah. And we were reflecting just before we went live about when we first started work. I think more for me than for you, Adrian. When I first started work, it was all about paper. Yes, we had computers, the green screen IBM computers, but we had paper and we went to talk to people. And we weren't bombarded continually by information. I think now we've got, as you say, the internet, we've got WhatsApp, Slack, we've got multiple channels to communicate with each other, which is great, but we never switch off.
Mm.
The lovely mobile phone which we have, which is great, follows us around, and on that phone you can have your email, you can have all these tools to help us communicate. But I think the impact of that is that we do struggle to switch off. And I think with a culture is really difficult to describe, but it's about the way we do things around here. And I've found, and I don't know if you've found that, but when you're working somewhere, that sort of increasing level of communication and emails, WhatsApp, Slack, things, you kind of get drawn into it, and you find yourself behaving in the same way as everybody else. And it's a bit of an unconscious thing. And we all get drawn into it because we all, at our hearts, we want to fit in with where we are. We want to be liked, but it does impact us. And it's one of these things, I think, that creeps up on us.
Mm.
This sort of always on. It's great to, your phone pings, you've got a message. In some ways that's good, and it's great to be able to communicate quickly and easily, but I find myself very easily distracted from work to something else, and then I'm like, oh, I've forgotten what I was doing.
It's very true, isn't it? And I think the always onness it can create an expectation of an instantaneous reply. And before we went live, we were talking about, or I was reflecting on one of the first jobs I ever had was an insurance broker. And this was back in the day. It does sound ridiculous now, where when I first joined, I was sitting in front of a green screen monitor, and there were memos that came in on paper from insurance companies. And when there were some policies where you had a manual proposal form that the policyholder filled out, you sent it to the insurance company. But everything was a bit slower, right? Because if something came in, well, it didn't really matter if you wrote the reply now or at 4:45, it wasn't going to leave the building until 5. So do you think there's something about the instantaneousness, the sort of, you can actually almost have a really, albeit a really bad conversation, but you can have a conversation by email now?
Yeah, you can. And I think there is that. If somebody sends an email, someone replies, then I found myself getting caught up in it. I'll reply. And it can be 6, 7, 8 p.m. in the evening. But because it's there, you reply. And then you kind of get caught up doing it regularly. And there's no need to. But I think that's where I seem to remember noticing, if I was particularly conscious of it when I managed a team of people, because I thought, well, actually, if I start replying to an email at 7 or 8 in the evening, then someone's going to reply to me, and then I'm going to reply to them, and it's setting an example. But it's so difficult not to do it. And in some cases, there's advantages of having that information, but in other ways, it's just blurring all the boundaries we have between our work and our lives. And maybe for some people that's fine. But
it is interesting, isn't it? Because the boundaries thing, if we think about well-being and boundaries, it's interesting because I think one thing that's probably true now more than ever is it's possible to work quite flexibly.
Yes.
And that might involve, for someone, for example, might involve working for a period of time, then doing homeschooling for a period, then coming back and working in the evening. But to others who perhaps don't know their situation so well, they might think that they're working very long hours, and that might create a sort of parallel expectation that, gosh, that person's working 12 hours, I should be working. It becomes sometimes a bit of a virtual who can stay in the office longest competition, doesn't it?
It does, yes, yeah. And I think that was once, well, we were physically able to go to offices, it would happen in the physical office a bit as well.
Yeah.
You have flexible hours, but some people will come in early.
Yeah.
But they get noticed leaving early. And
yes,
although it's never a said thing, you just feel that should I be leaving? Forget that you might have been there since 7 in the morning. And it's really quite challenging, I think. And right, at the moment, we could all work whenever we wanted, really, as long as we get the work done. But it takes a long time to change the culture, the way we work, the expectation. And it's who sets that expectation. Are we setting it individually?
I was just going to ask that question, Corinne, because I think it's clearly an issue that I think probably everyone listening in would recognise, that there's this always on culture. It probably leads to or could lead to burnout. So the $64,000 question is, what could we do as individual BAs or individual practitioners to help cultivate a culture where that doesn't happen? And I mean, one thing you mentioned there is I think was a really nice, sort of beautiful in its simplicity example is, we'll set a good example, And as you were saying that, I was thinking that's really interesting, because email tools will often have a schedule feature. So if you happen to be working late at night, but you don't want to risk other people feeling they have to reply, I suppose you could actually schedule it for the next thing tomorrow morning, couldn't you?
You could do, yes, yeah.
Are there any other sort of tips on cultivating less of an always-on culture you'd have?
I think to start with, it's become aware of your own habits, your own behaviours, and it's my voice of experience here. I mean, I love my job, I love what I do, and I could be working a long time and not give up. And I would often hear myself going, "Oh, I'm getting a bit tired, but I love what I do, so it's fine. I'm not going to get tired because I love what I do." But we do get physically tired, and I think it's noticing those things and noticing actually I haven't taken a break, I haven't looked after my physical health or that kind of thing. So I think it's noticing your own behaviors really is one of them, and noticing when, because burnout, that kind of thing can creep up on you.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to have a big kind of stressful event. I mean, some people do have very stressful events that happen, but sometimes I mean, how many people listening to this call have worked and worked and worked, love their job, and as soon as you go on holiday,
Yeah.
you get poorly.
Yeah.
And that's because it's the body going, aha, you're relaxing. So I do encourage people just to be aware and notice. And for me, some of the signals are about sort of tiredness creeping up, maybe just getting a little bit irritable, maybe noticing that you're not focusing as much as you were, you're not making decisions. For me, it's a really difficult one to describe, but for me, it does feel a bit like a bit of sort of fog in my brain. Doesn't feel clear. It just feels a bit murky.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I mean, that really resonates with me as well, Corinne, because for me, I mean, I suppose that feeling, that tipping point of burnout's different for everyone, I suppose.
It is, yeah.
But the way I would describe it is as overwhelm is when, when you get in and it's like, well, there's 150 unanswered emails. I've got a to-do list, 3 weeks of things which I'm behind on. And now the phone's ringing and I've got a text message. Where do I start? Type of thing. So I mean, what if someone's in that overwhelm situation? Have you any practical tips on how to start nudging away from that type of overwhelm?
I do think if you find yourself in overwhelm, the initial thing is just step back from all of it for a little while. And I've just noticed, I think it's Paul saying he works in 50-minute chunks and then takes 5 minutes of stretching. But the thing I'm picking up there, and thank you for your question, it's really good. Actually moving the body, moving away, actually changes your state, helps you free your mind up a bit. Because I think when you're in overwhelm and you've got, as you say, all these emails to answer, maybe somebody wanting something done, you get to the point where you just think, I can't do any of this. And it's almost like you can physically switch off email, switch off all the messaging applications, but actually physically distance yourself from that environment just for a little while, even if it's just as Paul's saying here, 5 minutes of stretching, yoga, maybe it's a walk around the block, a walk around your garden. Just change your environment, because our bodies and our minds are quite closely linked.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think often, and again, this is a personal reflection, but when I've been burnt out, it becomes for me a bit of a doom loop, because I find I make really poor decisions when I'm burnt out. And that's the irony thing, is I overcommit when I'm burnt out, and it just becomes even worse. So another question from Paul is, what are some of the techniques for employees for focusing or creating focused time?
I think it is, I'll just share what's worked for me. I think it is working out what chunks of time are good for you to focus. And most people find it 40-45 minutes after that you start to lose track. And if you've got a piece of work you need to finish, do that first. Pick the most challenging and the tasks that need your focus when you're most at your best for working. And I'm going to say in the morning, but that other people might not be best in the morning. But it's knowing, so I suppose part of it's knowing your rhythm, knowing when you're working at your best, and pick the tasks that you need to get done at that point. But things like closing down other applications, switching off notifications so that they're not constantly buzzing up. And I know from my own experience, as soon as something pops up in the corner of my screen, it grabs my attention. And as soon as it's grabbed my attention, I've not focused.
Absolutely. And I've started using the analogy of flight mode on a mobile phone.
Yes.
And in fact, if I want to be really focused, I turn flight mode on, but I tell anyone else who at the moment working with virtually, I'm on flight mode between these hours. So Like if it's really, really important, then there is a landline you can get me on, but no one ever rings that.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I'll share a couple of books. I don't know if you've read these, Corinne, but I found really useful on this. There's one by Cal Newport, I think, called Deep Work.
Oh yes, I'm aware of it, but I've not read it yet.
Yeah, that's really interesting on focus. And one I read more recently is by Nia, I forget his surname, called Indistractable, which is a fantastic. Both of them you can get on Audible if you're an audiobook fan as well. So Victoria makes an observation, a really, really interesting observation, which is I've noticed that some people are always on for more senior members of the team, but not so much for less senior members. Is it worth challenging that?
Oh yes, I think so. Yes, and I suppose that's their. Yeah, they're always there if somebody senior asks. I would question myself as to why I'm doing that. But yeah, I suppose it's a perception. It's that whole perception. If somebody senior asks, they'll have to answer it. But I would question myself, well, do I have to answer it? Just because somebody senior sent me something, do I need to respond to it? And
Absolutely.
yeah, finding ways to challenge it. And for me, there are occasions when, I'm thinking back to, I used to be a programmer, I was on call. Even sometimes when I wasn't on call, even something happened that the system needed to be looked at, then yes, you would answer that. But those were the days where people would phone you up if there was a real emergency. But it's then thinking, actually, is this a very urgent thing, or can it wait till tomorrow? And I think the trouble is, at the heart of it, a lot of us like to please other people. And possibly this is pulling into what Victoria's saying here. We want to please our more senior staff. We want to be seen, we want to be seen to be doing a good job, but we want to please them. We want to get praise. Sometimes that's unconscious, that it's inbuilt to us that we want to do well. So it might then be why we will answer something if somebody senior says it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because I was thinking about, actually, Corinne, I was thinking we've worked together in lots of different contexts.
We have.
But one of the contexts we've worked together for as volunteers was for the IIBA UK chapter when we were both on the board. And that was clearly a time when everyone was on borrowed time, on spare time. But we would speak to each other in the evening because that was normal. But I suppose and I'm only reflecting on this now, really, but one habit I picked up is almost it's fine to ring anyone that you know well at any time. But the first thing I would say is, oh, hi, Corinne, is now a good time to talk? And if you said no, then we'd arrange a time to talk. So maybe sometimes it's about giving the person the option to object. They might have picked up because it might be urgent, but then give them the opportunity to defer that, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think that that's a nice way of giving somebody that option, rather than just completely launching into, oh, hi, Corinne, I need blah blah blah. Can we have a chat about this?
Yeah.
It's actually, is this a convenient time?
Fantastic. Oh, Nirav has given a good reminder of the author's name for Indistractable. It's Nir Errol. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but Nirav also says that's an absolutely brilliant book. I found it brilliant too. So fantastic. So let's take another question. So we have a question from John. Who says, as someone also coming out of burnout, I would like to thank you for the session. It's good to hear everything you've said. John reflects that one of the biggest problems was to get into a permanently failing mentality. I now realise that it was less a toxic business than an incompatibility. But the one thing I'd say from experience is, if something doesn't feel right, don't keep fighting through and trying to overcome it. Stop and reach out for people to help you to identify what's going wrong. And if you're a BA with a PM, PO, or Scrum Master duties, try not to get into the mindset of every fault is mine to fix. I'm not sure there's anything I can add to that. I think that's a pretty profound statement, very useful one.
Yeah, very useful. But I think, one of the things I'm going to pick up on that, and thank you, John, that's excellent, is we do all have a natural negativity bias that, through evolution, human beings will look for, we're constantly scanning our environment for, are we safe, is there danger around, which means that negativity, things that are not good, grab our attention. And our role in projects is to find the problems and sort them out, which is great and it's lovely and it's brilliant. But we then can, if we're starting to feel burnt out, if we're starting to feel not so strong, the negatives will always grab our attention. And to try and balance it out with the more positive things gets more and more difficult the more tired you are.
Yeah.
And I think, I think I'm reading this correctly, John, I hope so, but this, the sort of, I'm reading it as this is kind of, you get an inside feel, a gut feel. For me, I call it my inner guidance system that tells me something's not quite right. And it could be that, I've been working too hard and I'm burnt out, or actually I'm in the wrong place. I'm sure lots of us have had those situations where we've been on the world's best project and everything's gone really well, possibly it's playing to our strengths, then you get moved to another project. Sorry, Adrian, I've done this to you probably. And you think, actually, this environment doesn't suit me, it's a really difficult project, or just the personalities or the type of project doesn't suit my skill set. And you can immediately going from I love my job to I hate my job. And we're not always going to get the best jobs, but it's about knowing our inner guidance system and when we need to reach out for help and support.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things from John's observation that really resonated with me too, is that actually it's okay to say that, like it's okay to say I'm not feeling okay about this. That isn't, or in my view at least, that isn't a weakness. I think that's again subjectively that's a strength, because it sort of shows self-awareness and the person is seeing the situation for what it is. And again, I mean, for me, I find that feeling of uncomfortableness, I don't know where it is for you, Corinne, but it's in my stomach normally.
Yes.
It's like it's a mixture, and the thing I find really hard is I find excitement and fear quite similar. So sometimes I don't know if it's because it's something I've not done before, and it's a bit, you've got nervous anticipation, or whether it's not quite right. So I find, sometimes picking up the phone to like a trusted advisor. We've all got our trusted advisors, and it's good to have one on speed dial, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about that, not always knowing the difference between excitement and fear, because I was thinking about that this afternoon, and I think I would still remember sitting on a roller coaster at the top, being absolutely scared stiff. I don't like roller coasters. Having done it, I had similar feelings, but that was excitement. And you're kind of like, I don't know which is which. And moods, emotions, moods, whatever you want to call them, our feelings are quite confusing. Sometimes you don't quite know which one it is, and you have to kind of tune into your own emotions to work it out.
Definitely.
Sometimes, yeah.
Definitely. So, so Christina asks, what about the language we use to describe the issues? So, for example, I'm too thinly stretched seems to avoid the mental and emotional reality. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think we do use a lot of metaphors linked to our sort of body, as in like we're thinly stretched, and our behaviors. And I do think some of that then does come back to actually the mental, emotional ones are difficult to describe. And I suppose it's back to culture. We'll quite more readily talk about, oh yeah, I've sprained my ankle or I've hurt my arm, than actually my head feels weird and I'm not quite on full. I sometimes say I'm not firing on full cylinders, which could be my mind or it could be my body. But I think it's been more difficult to talk about not feeling on the top of your game emotionally. And hopefully that is becoming a lot more into the conversation now, and people are being more aware of it. And I hope people will talk about it more, because our minds and our bodies are very closely connected, and it is getting them to all work together is how we fully function and are well.
Yeah, I've read a couple of articles, and again, these are articles I read a while ago, so I can't remember who wrote them or what site they were on. But what one was saying essentially, we should stop apologizing for everything on email. So, you know, oh, I'm sorry I haven't replied.
Yes.
Maybe it's better to say, you know, thank you for your patience type of thing. In fact, it might have been one of
Yeah.
David Beckham's David Beckham, the BA's presentations that
Yeah.
he talks
Not
about
the
this.
footballer.
Yeah, not the footballer.
David Beckham, the BA, has got much greater insights.
Yeah, they would be very different presentations.
Yeah.
So it might have been one of his. And also, I remember on the whole, you know, burnout and to a certain extent work-life balance, because work-life balance comes into this, is, you know, the whole, well, you know, well, I haven't got time for X. If you know, often people say, well, I haven't got the opportunity to. But if you start saying, well, I haven't got time for the things you're actually turning away. So, you know, I'll put my hands up and say, I have been in situations where I've been like, oh, do you know what? I'll defer my dentist's appointment because I've got a meeting I've got to go to, or whatever. What you're really saying there is, I haven't got time to look after my health, or, you know, because you know, actually
Yeah.
having had horrendous toothache in the past, the minute you've got a toothache, that's a real problem.
It becomes your top priority, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. So, fantastic. So another reflection from Paul, and I've just remembered Paul is tuning in from New Zealand. I've no idea what time
Oh,
or
God.
what day it is there, Paul. But thank you very much for tuning in.
Oh, welcome.
What one technique? So Paul says, one technique I've learned to deal with negativity and attention distractions is to start a task, event, or activity with a thinking process. In this, I set what I expect, remind myself who is dependent on this event, and also how do I want to feel emotionally during this. It gets the thinking aligned and the mind set on the moment. It's about active engagement of the mind for now. Sounds like a fantastic approach.
Yeah, very good.
And actually, if you remind yourself who's reliant on it, that's really interesting as well. It's connecting to a greater purpose, isn't it? It means that perhaps you're less likely to get distracted by the 13 LinkedIn pings on your phone type of thing. And
Yes, yeah. And I think that sort of almost that taking time to say, actually, how do I want to feel about this?
yeah.
And you can tune into that, you know, I want to feel good about this. I want to be curious about it. Sometimes I find that, you know, if I'm finding a task difficult and I've been procrastinating on it because I'm not sure how to start it. So I mean, I love mind mapping. So I suppose I use the logical part of my mind and being an analyst to mind map it out, get lots of ideas or thoughts out. And then I try to tune into the fact that, okay, I'm finding it difficult. I'll procrastinate, you know, I'll go and wash the windows or do something else. But actually, if I try to change my mindset into, well, I'm curious to see if I could just get one piece done. And having mind mapped it out, I can then pick up small pieces. So I think what's coming out for me, and this I'm only really showing what I've learned through my experiences, is tuning into what I suppose partly using my strengths, because I know that I have a strength around curiosity, and so I'm kind of tuning into my strengths and what I know about myself to try and turn around that stuck mind into a more positive mind.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm a real fan of mind maps too, and actually rich pictures.
Yes.
Or just any kind of like, I find if I'm stuck, draw something, and you know, but
Yeah.
it's what I call a disposable drawing. It's not supposed to have any meaning. It's just a mental model type of thing. So, okay, so I want to explore. We've got more questions coming in, and we will take as many as we can. But I just want to change direction just a little bit and talk about well-being or resilience.
Okay.
Because a lot of what we're talking about here also feeds into the fact that, you know what, many of us on the call here may be working on or have worked on major transformational programs, multi-year programs. It's really easy to get change fatigue. Doesn't matter whether it's waterfall or agile. In fact, if you're agile and delivering constant change, it can be, you know, in some ways even harder to maintain the momentum if it's going on for a long period. So breaking those things down, well-being and resilience, what would you say those two terms actually mean to you?
Oh gosh, to me. So I'm going to say what well-being So well-being has actually been defined. So I'm looking at my notes now. I wrote this
Fantastic.
down so I wouldn't forget. And now I can't find my notes. Here we go. I found it. So the Oxford Dictionary says well-being is a state of being comfortable, healthy, and happy. And the World Health Organization, I think it was in 1948, so it's quite a long time ago, actually defined it as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. So what does all that mean? I think, so for me, it is about feeling happy, feeling that I'm okay to turn up in the world. And for me, there is a sense of balance between my physical state, my emotional state. And I think the social bit's not to be underestimated. And I'm sure maybe some of us are noticing that at the moment, where we can connect online, but we can't physically be together. And that is a big part of our well-being. So well-being for me is around balancing all of those things.
And it is interesting, isn't it? Because I know one thing I've learned over the years is that how I feel mentally, or my mental well-being is inextricably linked to physical well-being.
Yeah.
Because I know if I skip an exercise session, I just don't have the motivation I would normally. And I tend to do walks or runs or whatever. But if I skip one, I just feel lousy.
Yeah. 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 And I think, this whole kind of connection, our thinking and our feeling and our behavior are all very closely linked.
Mm,
So when I was saying earlier about feeling overwhelmed, to go out for a walk or change your physical state is a way to sort of reconnect the mental state as well.
mm,
So, coming back to when you're overwhelmed, or I suppose coming back to that sort of the mood feelings, some of us might get a feeling of tension, anxiety, feeling sort of stressed inside. We get these bodily sensations. So in those situations, it's probably good to go out and walk around slowly to sort of try and dissipate the tension. And using breathing exercises is really valid as well.
mm.
We all breathe, we have to breathe. But I don't know about you, I notice when I'm tense, my breathing becomes very shallow.
It does, for
And
sure.
sometimes you can just, move your chair back from your desk, close your eyes and take 4 or 5 deep breaths. It will completely change how you feel.
Mm,
And these things you might not notice immediately that they affect your mental health, but they will. You suddenly find that, for me, the fog begins to clear.
mm.
And
That's a really powerful metaphor for the fog
yeah,
beginning to
the
clear.
fog beginning to clear, yeah.
So, Corin, if that's well-being, what would you say resilience is? Is resilience the ability for someone to keep themselves well, or is it more than that?
I think resilience, there's lots of papers on resilience and lots of different views on what resilience is. Some people think it's a personality trait, others think it's a process. But for me, resilience is about how we adapt. As we
Mm,
go through our course of life, things happen to us. Yeah, good things happen to us, not so good things happen to us. And it's how we adapt to those things, how we learn from them. And we all adapt at different rates. And some of that might come back to our genetics and our history and the things we've had, the experiences we've had. So I think for me that the link to well-being is, in a team, giving everybody the space they need, because we don't all recover from setbacks at the same speed.
mm,
Yeah. So I'm sure many of us on this call are aware, in the UK we call it the Sarah curve, the change curve, which comes from the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. But recognizing, and I recognized it as soon as we had the COVID-19 lockdown, I was getting angry, frustrated, annoyed, and I suddenly went, oh gosh, this is what's happening.
yeah, and for anyone not familiar with the Sarah curve, it is. I mean, the Sarah curve is a version of the Kubler-Ross curve, I think.
It
But
is, yeah, it
so
is.
shock, anger, rejection, acceptance, hope type of thing. Um,
Mm.
so fantastic. So if you think about, say, well-being, how do we? Any tips for like encouraging and protecting the well-being of us individually as a practitioner. So what could I do as a practitioner? But also, are there things I could do that would have a positive impact on the well-being of the people I work with, whether that's my team or the stakeholders or the people impacted by the project I'm about to deploy? And any tips on that, Corinne?
I think for personal well-being, it's making sure finding time for things that you love. And that's going to be very personal for each of us. And yes, it could be, I love business analysis, I do it all day long, but I'm just
sure
thinking, there's something called flow state. So just to summarize it, it's those states when you've got so absorbed in something that time seems to have disappeared. So for some, it might be, I've been so absorbed in a good book, I've been here 3 or 4 hours. My daughter actually loves running, and she's run lots of marathons, but she says, I just love the rhythm of my body when I'm running. And for me, that keeps me well, both mentally and physically. Her mind sort of sorts stuff out. I mean, I love the outdoors. I do a lot of walking. I go outside. But it's very individual. And I think that does help with well-being. If you can find a piece of time, a chunk of time, just to do something you love.
Because
Sorry to interrupt you.
sorry,
We're looking over each other, aren't we? I think particularly when we do feel overwhelmed or stressed, you sometimes forget, and you have to think back to, so what is it I do like doing? And it can be something really simple. It doesn't have to be anything big.
And I know, well, I've seen from social media, and we've discussed briefly in the past, that you run a Fresh Air Fridays group. What's that about, Corinne?
I do. Well, I did until we had to stay
until lockdown. Yes, yeah.
But that for me, so that's bringing. I love being outdoors, and I think it comes back from my husband used to be in the Navy. He was a submariner, so he used to spend up to 6 months of the year in a submarine.
Wow.
Away from fresh air. And all he wanted to do when he came back, so we lived in Devon, would be go for a walk. We'd go and sit out on Dartmoor. But we noticed it wasn't just the fresh air and the space, but it was about time to just chat and connect. So for me, that's, I suppose, when I heard about Fresh Air Fridays, it's a bit like that. So it's getting outside. So you've got that change in environment, the ability to switch off and slow down. But it's a group thing, so we also get an opportunity to chat to each other and connect to each other. And I enjoy meeting people from all different walks of life. And it's called Fresh Air Friday. So I do run them on any day of the week, but the Fresh Air Friday name comes from getting the Friday feeling on any day of the week.
Oh, right. Oh, fantastic. That's a fantastic idea. So, okay, so let's take another question. So we have a question from Nefra. And Nefra says, with working from home and therefore areas of the home becoming in effect the workspace, short of having a dedicated room, do you have suggestions for ways to disassociate the space from work activities at the end of the working time each day or each week? Really, really tricky, but very good question.
Yeah, it's a very good question, because obviously a lot of us at the moment all over the world are having to work. I mean, I'm very fortunate because I've been working from home, working for myself, working as a consultant for a while. I do have a dedicated space. And I think I've appreciated it much more. Now I'm home every day, because I was home maybe once a week and I'd be out traveling. But if you don't have a dedicated space, you're probably in a shared space with family. I was talking to someone earlier today who was working on his dining room table. And I think, the dissociation is the word. It's about having some form of ritual or routine that you can pack everything up. So yes, as Adrian said at the beginning, I'm also studying at the moment. And for some reason I haven't really fathomed out yet, I don't often study in my workspace. I've got a very nice desk, but I tend to study at my dining room table. But when I've finished, I pack it all away, and I've got a little box I put it in, and I put it to one side. And obviously I know different people have got different amounts of space. If you have got a space, you can just put things to one side, or maybe cover it over in the evening. It means that you can dissociate from that workspace.
Yeah, I love the idea of having a ritual. And again, this is one of those things that I suppose, like many people, I've been reading quite a lot and listening to more audiobooks in the last few weeks. So
Yeah, me too.
I can't remember which. This is when I listened. This one might be from Cal Newport's Deep Work. I really can't remember. But there's somewhere I read about having a shutdown ritual, but also like it's interesting, isn't it? We'll often say, well, I need to set a start time. So I'm starting. I'm going to be at my desk at 8, or 7 or 6 or whatever time it happens to be.
Mm.
But very rarely do we say, and this is the time I'm going to finish.
No.
So, or we might have a soft idea, but it blurs. So maybe there's something about saying, right, well, I'm going to be at my desk at 7 and I'm going to finish at this time. And unless the world is on fire, that's the time I'm going to finish. So, and the idea of a ritual, I think that really resonates, even if it's just packing the laptop back up in its case, or even if it's just folding the laptop in half and saying, almost work's done until tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah. And you brought to mind for me, so in the UK here, we've now got a radio station called Scala Radio, which plays classical music. And the presenter that comes on at the afternoon, he's actually a sheep farmer who also then presents classical music. This is how much I've been listening to radio.
Wow.
But besides, he has one of the rituals that he always puts 2 pieces on back to back at 5 p.m. so he can go and feed his sheepdogs. But he's also put in a 5:30 p.m. is the shut your laptops. It's the end of the working day,
Brilliant.
and he'll do it every day. So it is. I mean, we are creatures of habit. We do like our routines and our patterns. And I think you mentioned at the beginning that I'm not sure what you did, but I'll mention I'm an NLP practitioner, which is neuro linguistic programming. The programming part of NLP is all about our behaviors, our patterns, and we have patterns of behavior because it makes it easier for us. So we unconsciously do things. And that's why we do seek a routine. So if we have a routine about, even if it's just putting your laptop and your papers on one side, that is a signal to your unconscious mind that I'm now changing state from work mode to relaxation mode.
Yeah, some sort of trigger. So.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So we've talked a bit about well-being, and just briefly, Corinne, because resilience is it's a tricky skill to build, isn't it?
It is, yes.
And we've probably all had situations where, you know what it's like, you're on one, and in fact, that's interesting. My shoulders literally shrugged as I was saying this, but we've all worked on those projects or programs where it just feels like, we're literally caught in the crossfire. Like as BAs,
Yes.
we get caught in the crossfire.
Yes.
And we sometimes have to make ourselves really unpopular short term, because we have to say all the unpopular things like, well, not this bluntly, but you've not thought that solution through very well, and actually we need to take a more holistic look at, we need to put the brakes on things sometimes. Any sort of briefly, any tips on building resilience so that those sorts of things don't burn us out?
I think for me it's thinking about the sort of, I'm not quite sure how to describe this, the sort of the personal you, your personal identity as a person, and then your identity or role as a business analyst, and being able to kind of swap between the two. And I suppose the easiest way I could describe it is like being an actor. When you go on stage, you're taking on your business analyst persona, and you have to sometimes say things that are unpopular, bring things out to get to the right solution. And again, it's a bit like the leaving the work at the end of the day. You have to sort of leave that role and dissociate it from it, and sort of come back to your personal space, because we do take things personally. We all want to do a good job. It's hard sometimes, and it's going to be difficult. We're going to be in the firing line, but it's not personal normally, and understanding it from someone else's perspective.
Yeah. I was just, as you were speaking, thinking about perspectives and empathy.
Yeah.
And the fact that, I like to think, and maybe this is me being positive, that there aren't that many people who deliberately want to be really awkward in the world. And actually it's normally about, so maybe that, I mean, you mentioned curiosity earlier. Maybe it's about being curious and saying, well, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what worldview, or what set of, I wonder what knowledge or worldview they have, which is making them think that. And if I know that, maybe that will change my view, or maybe it will help me have a conversation with them.
Yes. Yeah.
Curiosity. So,
and I think,
sorry, Corinne.
God, I was going to think, and I think understanding that we've all got different personalities, we all have different preferences. And somebody, you know, we're business analysts. We like to analyze things and reflect on things. Other people don't. They might see the world very differently.
Fantastic. So, okay, well, let's take another question from Milena. So Milena asks or observes, when I am burnt out, I find it helpful to attend training instead of taking holidays. This way I could still be engaged with my job, but change the scene, connect with different people and regain my confidence. I think that's a fantastic observation.
Yes. And I think, you know, again, I'm smiling because for me, again, I know that I love learning, or I wouldn't be doing a master's degree.
Yeah.
I am wondering sometimes why. But that's the whole ups and downs of doing something. There's challenges and not. But, you know, Milena's made a really good point. It's probably something that she loves. But actually going to training, you're putting yourself in a new environment. You're giving yourself the opportunity to use your brain in a different way. But if you're still interested and passionate about business analysis and your role, you're learning something new at the same time.
Yeah,
and it can help remotivate you.
And springboarding from that point, I also think things like conferences or IIBA events. And if anyone on the call is a business analyst and isn't a member of IIBA or isn't connected to the local chapter, you know, I'd encourage you to take a look on the IIBA. That's the International Institute for Business Analysis's website, because, you know, chapter events are fantastic. You know, IIBA webinars are fantastic as well. So good. So moving on to something which I think probably underpins a lot of what we've talked about, Corinne, which is a positive mindset. And to what extent, I guess, firstly, to what extent do you think a positive mindset underpins well-being and resilience? And you know, what is a positive mindset, and how can we develop one? Those are big questions. Sorry, Corinne.
Big questions. How long have we got? So for me, I suppose a positive mindset is about our outlook on life. And I mean, there's a lady called Carol, again, I think you pronounce it Dweck or Dweck, but she's written a book called Mindset. And that's all about having a growth mindset. And, you know, many people are born up with, you know, I've got the intellect I've got and it will never change. But underpinning it all, a growth mindset, which I kind of attribute to being a positive mindset, maybe there's some difference, is about curiosity, having a learning mindset, wanting to find out things. But for me, also coming back to what you've actually said, the positive mindset, it is then about looking, I suppose, again, using that curiosity and learning mindset to look for the good in things. And I'm not saying that's always easy. And sometimes when we're in the midst of very difficult and emotional situations, you can't step back and go, oh, what could I learn from this? But it's then the benefit of reflecting back later. You can say, actually, what was good about it.
I mean, I don't know if you find this, but on the idea of reflection, one thing I've found useful at different points in my career and in my life generally is journaling. But I discovered for me, and I don't know if, I mean, everyone's different, I suppose, but I found the way I can regularly journal is just do it in bullet points. Like I don't write a lot. I mean, sometimes I do, but for me, and sometimes it's just about, like, you know, I'll write things like completely messed up a call with X. Next time I need to do this. But then normally I look back at it in 3 days' time and think it wasn't actually that bad. You know, the rawness was there, but it wasn't. It's rarely as bad as we think it is in the moment.
Yeah, I think so. And I think for me, part of, again, some of it's this back to, do you focus on the negatives or the positives? So we all naturally focus on the negatives. I'm saying we all, I think a lot of us do. And I remember numerous occasions, I remember discussing it with you, Adrian, after I'm sure we've done a presentation together, we get the conference feedback. You
Oh,
immediately go for the less
one
than
bad
the
piece.
one less than positive score, but you've got 99 lovely ones and one, and that's the one. And that's the one we look at. And it's then stepping back and going, okay, so what was good? So you might have had the worst workshop ever, the worst day ever, but even if you can find one snippet at the end of the day of something that was good, it does start to train your mind to look for the positives and sort of tap into those positives.
And I think the other thing is sometimes we don't know what's going on behind the curtain for people.
No.
And people can have stuff going on in that. Like I remember I think I was facilitating a workshop and someone just seemed really distracted. They were on, they're on their phone a lot. And you sort of think, well, am I not connecting with this person? And, and anyway, I in the end, I had a chat to them. I didn't raise it with them because before I could, they essentially said, "Oh, something like, oh, I'm really sorry, I'm on my phone. I've got a bit of a crisis, personal crisis happening at home with," and then went into some detail about some difficult things that were happening. So, I've just got to send some text messages to coordinate this issue. And once I knew that, I was like, oh wow, I'm really pleased. Thank you for telling me that, because now I know it's not that you're not connecting type of thing. So, a reflection from Tina.
Yeah.
Tina says, I recently heard the phrase positivity is a learned behavior, which means if you didn't learn it when you were young, you have to teach yourself or identify role models when older. That's really interesting. I'd never thought of that before or heard that.
Yeah. I don't know whether it is a learned behavior.
Ooh, controversial.
I don't know whether it is. I mean, I think we do, again, coming back to, I think evolutionary, we will, we'll look for danger. Our bodies will scan for danger. The amygdala in the brain is there to look for danger. However, there's a lot of work done by a lady called Barbara Fredrickson, who has written a book called Positivity. And she's focused on positive emotions. And actually, why do we have positive emotions? And she's got a theory called broaden and build. So, and I'm going to go back to the caveman analogy. So, when we lived in caves, obviously the negative things there, so we run away when there's a scary mammoth coming or a saber-toothed tiger. But actually, when all around is safe, we had to venture out and look for food and be curious and build resources. And she's saying that the positive emotions are the ones that allow us to go and do that. The curiosity is one of our more positive emotions. It's the ones that drive us to broaden and build our resources. So that's why I'm wondering, is it a learned behavior or is it in there? I suppose we probably learn to keep safe first. A very young baby will cry when it's hungry and get annoyed if it's uncomfortable. So maybe that's what's first. Then we do gradually learn to balance it out with the positivity.
It's interesting, as you were saying that. I mean, on a bit of a tangent, Corinne, but I was thinking about something I heard, a lecture I heard recently by, and again, unfortunately the name escapes me, but it was a professor who wrote a book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers.
Oh gosh, yes.
And what I really took away from this half-hour lecture he gave is that if you think about the brain and emotional response, well, if you go back to something like a zebra, it's got to run away from the lions, and if it's got bitten, it's got to try and stay safe, and so on. But the type of fear it has is very it's very proximate. If you make a bad decision, you get eaten by the lion. The types of decisions we make now, you might, if you make a decision to eat badly in your 20s, you might not see the reaction to that for 20 years. No. And so what he posited was some of the anxiety we feel as a society these days is because there's such a displaced length of time from when we make the decision, like, have I invested in the right, have I sorted my pension out, or those sorts of things just create that anxiety. But anyway, a bit of a tangent there, Corinne.
Yeah. zebras and pensions.
Yeah, yeah. But fantastic. Well, we're almost out of time, Corinne, and I mean we've covered some really broad ground there. Just before we close, if you had one tip, or a couple, or one tip for people about really looking after their own well-being, particularly in the current situation with lockdown and COVID-19, what would that tip be?
Gosh, I think it is to know yourself and take that time to be aware of what's happening for you. And I do really like the point you made about journaling, whether it's journaling, writing something down, mind mapping, drawing. I found by just getting some of my thoughts out on paper, I can then look back at it. So that that might be one. But I think that kind of tuning in. I think one of the questions earlier talked about that kind of intuition, that knowing something's not right. Just allow yourself to stop and work out what that is.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I'd add to that, actually, springboarding from that, I think now is a time more than ever for those people that we know well. If you get a sense that they're not okay, ask them if they're okay.
Ask them, yes, yeah. And I think we haven't talked about it so much, but one of the, and I think when I talked about the definition of well-being being mental, physical, and social, we do need to connect with each other. So yeah, I would think if you need to just reach out and talk to someone, and as BAs, we're very good listeners.
Absolutely.
So listen, and I think you're right. We will notice we'll notice signs from somebody before they might say it.
Well, that's it. And sometimes it's if there's someone you know well, it's actually easier to see their burning. Like I find that sometimes people who are outside the situation can see it happening more than the person in the situation. So you've got that sort of power of observation. So, well, thank you very much, Corinne. I mean, a really, really fantastic session. I am certain people will want to stay in touch with you. Learn more about what you do. What's the best way for people to connect with you? Is it on social media, or how should people stay in touch?
Probably LinkedIn is the easiest way. So I'm on LinkedIn. Corinne Thomas is the easiest one, rather than giving out long email addresses and all that kind of thing.
Fantastic. So
I'm on there quite regularly. I've just written something today about walking, the benefits of walking. So I think Manoj has just said, here, take a walk or have a coffee break.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is it building little spaces in? You don't always need a long space to reconnect and stay well. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very happy to engage with people on LinkedIn if they want to continue the conversation.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Corinne. A really, really interesting and insightful session. It's amazing how much we can cover in an hour. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Or if you're watching the recording, thanks for watching the recording. And really, as a bit of a reminder, these BA community webinars are very much about perhaps talking about some topics that are outside of the normal topics that we might talk about as BAs. So you'll see if you go back and look at the recordings, there's a whole range of recordings on previous topics. We like to sort of push the boundaries a little bit. After the session, you will get an email, and in that email there will be just a short survey. I would be very, very grateful if you could fill that survey in. One of the questions on there is, what topics would you like covered in future? And if you put a topic in there and it's one that I can find a speaker for, then I'll try and run it. Equally, if there's a topic you would like to speak about, then either contact me or put it in the survey, and let's make that happen. So fantastic. I hope everyone is keeping well in these strange circumstances that we find ourselves in. At the moment, I'm doing webinars weekly, so do take a look at the other webinars. If you're watching live, when you exit, you'll see a list of them pop up. We've got webinars coming up on the Scaled Agile framework, on business agility, on business analysis, what's new and what's next, a whole range of things. So do register for those as well. So thank you again, Corinne. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Have a wonderful evening or morning if you're Paul, because he's 6 a.m. in New Zealand, I think. So that's real
Yeah,
dedication.
very dedicated, getting up at 6 in the morning, Paul.
Yeah, and hope to see everyone again soon. So keep well.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Adrian.